Most of us have a mental or otherwise full of health advice, macros, supplements, heart rate, variability. But I think the right kind of light are at the right kind of hour and in the middle of all that information, because I think there's been a lot of information lately in the last few years. I think a lot of people are quietly more anxious about their health than they've ever been. And today's guest is going to say something that almost feels rebellious in 2026. Welcome back to another episode of Healthy Mind, Healthy Life. I'm your host, Sayan, and this is the show where we sit down and have conversations, real conversations like this. My guest today is Arnon Krongrad. Anand brings a perspective that cuts through the noise of modern wellness, and tonight we are talking about something that more and more people are starting to feel but rarely name it or say out loud. Folks, health is simple, and we are the ones making it complicated. So I welcome you to this conversation where we would be navigating through and unpacking what that actually means and where the complication is even coming from. So, Anand, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here with me tonight.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Anand. So, Anand, with that being said, before we get into the right kind of mentality that needs to be adapted to, I want to start somewhere honest with your story. I think uh, when you look at the way that people approach health today, all the apps, the protocols, the brands as well, was there a particular moment in your own work where you have realized just how far we have really drifted away from this simple, a really simple version of this?
I don't know that I can pinpoint a specific moment
Hmm.
when that happened, but remember my experience at the bedside, my experience around health and patients and disease goes back over decades. Um, my earliest, my earliest memory, my earliest medical memory is when I was 6 years old,
Okay.
when when my father took me on a house call. So that was my immersion into the world of doctoring. It was a simple world. It was my father saying, "Get in the car. Let's go in to see a patient." It was simple. There was no insurance company. There was no electronic medical record, right? It was a very simple interaction between a doctor and a man who, in that case, was having chest pain. I had similar such experiences later. For example, in 1981, I worked in a clinic in a remote part of Kenya, no electricity, okay, removed from modern centers, um, just patients and me. So, for example, I ran a nutrition clinic for children who were undernourished. They were suffering principally from protein undernutrition, uh, even though we were surrounded by protein. We lived on a lake that was rich with fish, for example. So that too was a very simple um, arrangement, a doctor and a patient, no insurance company, no deductibles, no coinsurance, no electronic medical records, no core measures, no guidelines, right? And it was easy to see without all that noise, it was very easy to see what was important. Okay. So in the case of this particular baby that I'm thinking of, what was important was to teach the mother how to feed the child. Okay. Later on, things became much more complicated. I entered the world of conventional Western medicine in the United States, managed care, electronic records, all the things I just referenced. And those third parties, which were not originally at the table with the patient and the doctor, as I experienced it, had their own opinions about what should happen. Now, if you step back and you look at the net effect of introducing third parties with their own opinions, their own needs as to what should happen, you realize that they sometimes conflict with the needs of the patient, the doctor too, but let's focus on the patient for a moment. So I think I've had a sense all my life, really, that we are needlessly complicating things. And if you look at our society today and you look at the requirements of health, okay, and they're not very many, don't be fat, don't be sedentary, don't be sleepy, right? Eat right, exercise, and get lots of sleep. I mean, that's 90% of your health equation right there. So why aren't people just following those very simple ideas. They're not following them because there's so much noise around us. You touched on some of it, with supplements. That's just an illustration, but there's a lot more.
Mhm.
So um, it does seem ironic to some people that I'm a physician and I'd like to get free of doctors and drugs, but I'm a man like any other man. I just want to be healthy.
Yeah, and I think that really tells us where we have really drifted away, compared to last few, maybe 2 or 3 decades. And um, uh, Dr. Anand, I think there is also an entire industry, if I'm honest, that's pushing the consumers in that direction, all right? And so I think that there's something internal too. I think the urge to really feel like we are in control, that we are doing something. So could you tell us perhaps the deeper patterns that you see underneath all of this, both in the system, which is obviously pushing us towards this, and in us as well as individuals? And, how should one really approach the solution to this as well, because I believe it's not going to be just easy, because there's also an entire system that's built around this, not just the food industry, the pharma industry, and I could say the entertainment industry to some extent as well. So what would you really like to say?
At the individual level, I think the challenge for a lot of people is to recognize that not everybody's looking out for your interest.
Hmm.
I mean, a lot of people have come to that conclusion. I mean, I see it more and more. There's a lot of skepticism generally. People don't just rush off to TikTok and YouTube and say, "Oh, let me believe this guy and that guy." I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing doubts. I'm seeing skepticism. Having doubts and skepticism is important, given what prevails. It's not enough. If you want to move your health forward, you need to find an alternative. You need to find somebody or somebodies, plural, who you can trust. And in order to trust, at least this is my view, if you want to trust somebody and really listen to them, they need to have at least two qualities. Number one, they need to know what they're talking about, which is where an awful lot of people fail. They're not qualified, just flat out. And number two, they need to have integrity, which is where a lot of other people fail. They have conflicts of interest. They're actually trying to sell you a product or a service or a device or something. So when you have that conflict of interest, I'm not sure you can fully trust those people, and it's a problem. I mean, we see it as a growing problem. I see it as a growing problem. You can't just as a knee-jerk reflex trust the government to tell you how to behave. We have examples of the government screwing it up going back decades. I mean, look at the 1970s when an American senator by the name of George McGovern decided to introduce what he calls the Dietary Guidelines for America, which said, don't eat meat, don't eat dairy products, make it all low fat, and eat lots of sugar, lots of bread, 7 servings of bread a day. That was not tested. There was no a priori support for that idea. It was implemented on a broad scale. I'm not saying everybody adopted it, but we've seen a massive spike in a number of chronic diseases since the introduction of that particular guideline, right? So you can't, as a reflex, trust the government. And there are plenty of other examples. So who do you trust becomes an issue.
Absolutely. That's really well said. And I think that does perhaps induce some degree of fear, in us. And it should. I mean, when there are people all around you that's trying to sell you products and sell you stuff, we become ultimately the product, right? We become their field of experiment, I would say. So I'm really glad that you brought this up, Dr. Arnold, because I think so much of what looks like discipline is actually fear in a tracksuit. So, if I have to be more specific and now talk about what listeners can might try to implement to set them apart from the system that we're talking about right now, what would you really like to say? I mean, what does a simple version of health actually look like in their ordinary world? I mean, definitely you mentioned some of the things like organic food and plenty of sleep. I think that covers the major chunk of health. And so I think there's also this I would say, this image that, being buffed and being muscular is something healthy. And, I mean, that kind of image is also portraying or being portrayed in the media as well, which leads us to think that, you should be doing you should be doing certain things, and, you shouldn't be doing certain things. But really, we need to ask, what is the definition of being healthy, right? Is being disease free, can that be categorized as being healthy? Or, what are we really looking at?
I think you just raised about 17 questions all in one. You touched on a lot of different facets. Like, let me just back up on a couple of things that caught my attention. You talked
Yeah.
about us being the product. You know, I
Mm.
I I refuse to be a product. I am nobody's product, and you don't have to adopt that position for yourself. It's a personal decision. I'm just telling you how I feel. Now, if you feel that you're not here to work for some company's profit, whether it's a food company or pharma company, but rather you're here for yourself, you want to reach maximal function, okay, what I call functional supremacy, then you have to be very clear about that in your own mind. And then the question becomes how? How do you do that? Okay.
Yeah.
The simple rules, you touched on them. I did not say organic food, and I just want to touch that. I'm not against organic food. But organic food alone is not gonna fix all your nutritional needs, right? So, let's say you have a diet of organic carrots. You're not gonna be healthy. There's an awful lot of other stuff. So nutrition is a it's a really important, potentially very simple conversation. Again, we mess it up for all the reasons I said, the conflicting interests of the food companies. This goes back decades, at least in the United States, right? But then you look at really simple states. Let's talk about saturated fat, which has been vilified for decades, okay, going back to at least the 1940s, as far as I can determine. Very simple study. There was, for example, a great study done in India, published in 1967 by a doctor named Malhotra. A lot of people don't know about this study, but what he did was he compared the health of the railway workers in northern India with the railway workers in southern India, where the difference between them behaviorally was the diet. The workers
Mhm.
in northern India had diets very rich in um, ghee and butter and milk, those sorts of things, and the people in the south tended to be more on the vegetarian side and really not have so much of the dairy fats. Okay,
Mm.
the
Yeah.
difference was staggering. The workers in the north came out much healthier in cardiovascular disease. Okay. So it's not enough to say organic. You got to start getting into what do you really need. And here it becomes potentially very, very simple also. But because of all the noise, people start to get it confused. Now, remind me the other 15 questions you just asked me.
No, I think that was the major chunk. But yeah, apart from that, I believe, what does one, indeed needs to do in this case? Because I believe, the fact that you shared that when you realize that, you are indeed, they're trying to make you the product, and then it becomes your choice. And then the question becomes how. I think that is something fundamental to what we are discussing today. But the other part of it would be, how can, because I believe you said organic food is not just the only thing that you should be focusing at. So I'm curious to know what else would you like to really add to that? Are we talking about supplements? Are we talking about any kind of additional nutrition, except from what we shouldn't be having too much of processed food? So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think fundamentally for health, you don't need supplements. Okay. My grandmother and your grandmother, they didn't take supplements all day long. They didn't hear about it. It was just not part of the conversation. And you know what? Man evolved to this point over 300,000 years without supplements. So what did he evolve on? Food. And if you trace back even farther than 300,000 years, if you go back a couple million Cro-Magnon man, more recently, we evolved as predators. We evolved as a species that hunted for fat based on some of the research that I've been reading. Um, like fatty organs, brain, bone marrow. These are things that we don't even consider these days, but they were actively hunted by our predecessors. If you look more recently, if you look at what health correlates to, and you look at height as an example, as a measure of health, okay, developmental height, from childhood on, you know, stunting versus normal growth versus high growth. Where you see the highest growth as the measure of health, whether it's Holland, which has the Netherlands, which has a history of lots of dairy, cheese, milk, meat. If you look at other studies based on Europe from the Middle Ages, if you look at North America, when the Europeans arrived in North America, they were on average 5'6". The natives, like the Cheyenne and the Sioux and the Comanches, who were living on buffalo, which was essentially an all meat diet, were closer to 6 feet. So, first of all, today's sort of mantra that you should stay away from meat and animal-based foods is completely crazy. It's completely antithetical to the idea of proper nutrition.
Yeah, I think that's a very solid message right there because I think there's a lot of discussion that really goes back and forth around being vegan. But that's one really solid idea that I would really like to. I mean, I totally
Well,
agree, and
let me touch on that. Veganism is as much ideology as it is nutritional strategy. You hear different arguments for veganism. One is um, man is the only animal that drinks milk from other species, which is factually false. We have examples. Number one, number two, who cares? Okay, so we're the only ones. Also the only ones that use Zoom, but you
yeah,
still use it, and it's okay. And number two, we hear that it's we shouldn't eat animals because trying to protect animals. And then you look at the data and what you find that olives, which you need for olive oil, which vegans consume, the olive harvest actually winds up killing millions of songbirds because what they do, they vacuum the olives off the trees and they suck all the birds in there and kill them. Right. So
wow,
factually, yeah. So factually, if you're out there promoting veganism and by de facto, by example, you're promoting olive oil, okay, you're actually promoting mass death of birds, just as an example. Not to mention the fact that from a nutritional point of view, veganism has been associated with all kinds of poor outcomes. So man is not a vegan.
agreed. Agreed. And I think that really comes off as a strong message, especially the example that you shared, Dr. Anand. And I believe, you know, uh, the solution to this problem requires a raise in the collective consciousness because I believe there's too much of information that's floating around and it's getting really harder and it'll get even more harder as time passes because it would be very difficult to sit down and look at the data and try to trust which information, which piece of information should you actually go with because I think there's just a lot of varying like you said, different ideologies coming into picture and a lot of conflicts of opinion. So if there's one thing that I would like all the listeners to carry forth from this conversation, I would say that when you talk about health, right, it doesn't really have to be this complicated to be real, right? You need to distinguish between, what does being healthy mean to you? Is it being disease free? Is it being in a state where you could do most of the activities that you wish you could? Because I think there's a lot of noise around that. Like I said, Dr. Anand, people really visualize being healthy means in a uh, muscular figure for men or for women could be in the perfect figure, right? Whatever that we're really idealizing here, but I think that is the question that you need to ask yourself, folks, because I think the boring fundamentals are not beneath you, right? They're underneath everything that actually works. So that is something that I would like you all to move with. But as we wrap this off, Anand, would love to ask you, where's the best place for listeners who want to keep learning from you and your work and the community that you've built? Where's the best place that you would direct them to go?
Um, if I might just respond to what you said, you know, I think
Please, please.
I think in your mind you should distinguish between cosmetics and function.
Oh yeah, I love it.
Right. So you touched on this a couple times, at least implicitly. People who like to have big muscles. Um, there's a fundamental question: is man by nature a bodybuilder or an endurance runner? Because we have
Wow.
bodybuilders, we have some very strong people, right, in the world, big muscles. India, I'm assuming you're in India, by the way. I didn't ask, but yeah. Okay. So India produced a man, a wrestler by the name of the Great Gama. That was his stage name. I don't know if you ever heard of him. Um, from, I think it was Bengali. In any event, this guy would do 5,000 squats before breakfast. Okay. About 100 years ago. So unbelievably strong. But do you need to be that strong to be healthy and to live your life? He needed it to become the champion wrestler that he was. But this begs the very personal question. What do you want? I'm not looking to be a champion Indian wrestler. Okay. I'm not looking to be a power lifter at the Olympics. My personal goal is to hike the Otter Trail. It's a trail in Africa. I want to hike it on March 14th, 2074. So that's 48 years from now. That's my goal. I've defined it on a personal level. You don't have to have the same goal. And now the question is, how do I get there? In order for me to make that hike on 48 years from now, I need three things. I need physical function, so I can walk. I need cognitive function, so I remember where the trail is. Okay. And I'd like to have emotional function. I'd like to enjoy the experience. And now we work backwards from there. So, number one, distinguish between cosmetics and function. I like the focus on function because it's definable and it's measurable and you can make progress towards it. And then once if you define that it's function you're after, which I think is the case for a lot of us, then you have to ask how you get there. And the pillars are going to be physical, cognitive, and emotional. And then the question is, how do you get there? Well, in theory, it's very simple. It's don't be fat, don't be sedentary, don't be sleepy. The technical requirements are you need food, you need gravity, and you need a pillow. That's all you really need for health. Okay, you got to be nourished. You got to be able to do some resistance. So gravity, squats. That's about all you really need. Walking, running, squatting, and a pillow, meaning you need to sleep. So that part's very easy. There are challenges. There are toxins of all kinds. There are poisons in our environments. You need to know what they are. Is this medication that's being rolled out good for you? If it's bad for you, even if you do all the things we said, the simple stuff, and you take a poison, it doesn't matter. So you need to be aware of those too. How do you get that information? It's very tricky. Our group, which is now running 7 years, almost 7 years, um, is devoted to tracking the kinds of information that you and I are discussing, the things you have to do and the things that you
Lovely.
have to avoid doing. It's called EZ, EZZ, the world of EZ. We're one option for doing that. There are many.
Perfect. So, well, Dr. Arnold, personally, I love the way that you articulated and you added your own perspectives to this. And yeah, I think that's a message as clear as it can get, right? What is it that you're after? It can get on a personal level, and that's where I would like to pause and let you guys think about, where's the place that you would like to really pause and sit down. What is that which you want? Is it something that arbitrary that we're talking about, or is it something fixed, perhaps, that you have in your definition? And if that's fixed, well, then there might be time for you to really look closer into this conversation and pick a part that really resonated with you. So, Anand, thank you so much for the honesty that you brought, the clarity that you brought into this conversation, because I believe we really needed that kind of clarity. So, folks, I will include the details in the show notes so that you could easily reach out to Ez and work with Dr. Anand. And with that, folks, to whoever is listening right now, maybe at the end of a long day, I would want to leave you with this, that you are not really behind or falling. I think you may simply be carrying a piece of advice that was never meant for your body, meant for the rhythm of your real life. So just strip it back, keep what works, and let the rest go. So this has been Sayan on Healthy Mind, Healthy Life. And with that, folks, I'm signing off for today, and we'll see you in the next one real soon.